Welcome to the Coach Within. I'm your host, Coach Jedi, a podcast where transformation begins from the inside out. Here, we explore coaching conversations that unlock clarity, spark insight, and bring you closer to your purpose. Whether you're a coach, a leader, or someone on the journey of personal growth, you're in the right place. Each episode brings real stories, practical tools, and thought-provoking reflections to help you thrive in life, leadership, relationships, and dreams. Let's journey inward, ignite the coach within, and brave your story. In today's episode, I'd like to explore something deeper, and that is about the coaching mindset. Previously, we talked about this idea of having or gaining that self-awareness and building that mindset as a foundational stone for good to great coaching. Too often, many leaders think about, I want to be greater, I want to be good, I want to be excellent in my coaching, just like they think about coaching as a skill. But coaching is more than a skill. Coaching, it's a mindset. Coaching is also a shift. Coaching, it's also the foundation or the condition of learning. Now, one of the key things when we think about the mindset of coaching is there are three key fundamentals. In the previous episode, I talked about this idea of self-awareness as being the first or the most important element. The second, it's self-development. And the third, it's self-regulation. So three key ideas or three key elements in establishing the coaching mindset. Now, a lot of coaches ask me, Jedi, what exactly is this coaching mindset and why is it so important that it deserves to be a core competency? In the entirety of coaching, there are various competency sets. We call them different skills or techniques or strategies or executional abilities as a coach. So competencies are how you deliver or what you do in the entirety of that coaching process. And one of the key competencies is competency number 2, which is on embodying a coaching mindset. So I like that word. It's not about equipping. It's not about doing. It's not about just about embracing, but about embodying a coaching mindset, which means there are two components. One, it's first developing, and the second, it's to maintain, to sustain, to develop further. So I like to call it develop and developing, which is an ongoing continuous process in building that mindset that remains with that openness, that curiosity, that flexibility, and client-centeredness. And this idea of openness as a mindset, I think it's so critical and so key. And that's why in my coaching programs, I often spend a huge amount of time talking about the mindset. And we don't have enough time to talk about that all in all my sessions. Otherwise, we'd have not enough time to complete the entirety of the program. But that's where I invite coaches to get on board my podcasts, my YouTubes, my articles on my website, or have a coaching conversation. We organize small classes where I call them mastery classes, where we kind of discuss, we talk about it. We discuss ideas or mindsets that we bring into the coaching conversation and what makes us open or makes us close to a certain mindset, and what makes us curious or less curious about something else, what makes us more flexible or less flexible, what makes us more client-centered or coach-centered or problem-centered or performance-centered. You see, for far too long, we have been so caught up in trying to be so focused on solutioning. We want the answers. So when organizations engage me, they say, Jedi, what is the learning outcome for the coaching program? What is the outcome or what is the solution? What is the answer? What is the expected measure by the end of the session? We're so caught up with the measures or measuring something. We're so caught up with the solution or the outcome that we forget and neglect the most important thing isn't the outcome, isn't the solution, isn't the answers. The most important thing, it's about first understanding what is the issue, what is that condition. Because I can give you a process, I can give you a framework, I can give you a strategy, a model, we can walk through an entire coaching conversation. But if our first starting premise is wrong or it's false, it will lead us to a wrong destination. And that's why in the navigation process, you think about this, it's very much like a boat on the sea. I remember one time I had a couple of friends from the Navy and I was previously from the Air Force. And so I had friends from the Navy and asked them, I said, what's the most challenging thing about sailing, like a boat or a huge ship? They said navigation. Because to me, in my mind at the point of time, I thought it's just going from point A to point B. But as they shared with me, they said, hey, no, the oceans are not exactly flat. The earth has a curvature, the oceans get bulges, it goes up and down. So although we may see a point towards a destination, but the ship cannot be pointing towards the direction. Sometimes the ship must be pointing off axis because there's undercurrents that is moving the ship in a certain direction, and so that it has to be compensated. And that gave me a really powerful insight to think about, let's say, hey, that's so true about coaching conversations. Sometimes we think that in order to get to a destination or a solution or an answer or an outcome, we have to focus on that. But we don't realize the undercurrents that is underpinning or that is influencing or that's driving or that is factors that goes beyond just what our immediate eyes can see. So our immediate eyes see the destination point, but what is happening deeper in the undercurrents, we can't see that. We can feel that, we can experience that. Like, why am I looking at the front, but I'm moving away from my goal? Have you had that experience before? Like, the more you look towards the front, the more you try to aim towards the goal, the more you drift away from that goal. Well, if that is happening for you, most likely, this might not be all the case, but most likely there are undercurrents that you are not able to see. And that's why the navigation process is so critical. As a navigator, as a navigator specialist, what's important is for us to understand, to get to that destination or to understand where we want to be, we first have to study the undercurrents that is underneath us. We also have to study the weather above us, the winds, the speed, the other things, right? The density of the water. Because you have different density, it might slow your boat down, it might increase the speed. If the oceans are deeper, what will happen to the buoyancy? What about the winds and strong weathers, which will move the waves? So all these factors have to be considered to allow us to know exactly how we should face or where should we face as we're moving our ship. But as we move our ship, it's also important to make constant adjustments. Because as we gain more clarity about the destination, we begin to realize, hey, maybe the destination was a mirage and the real destination was on the other side. So we get a rough general direction. And we call this the general direction of where the client wants to go. Because you see, to me in the coaching conversation, we are so caught up in wanting the client to define what you want, tell me exactly what you want. But I often tell coaches, I said, hey, nobody can tell you exactly 100% what they want. They may say that they know what they want, but until they reach that point, can they then say with certainty that that's really what they want? You see, for most clients, what they truly want, it's that general direction. They know that that's roughly where they want to be, but then they're not able to get that 100% certainty. In order for them to gain that 100% certainty, they need to embark on this journey. They need to go on this journey. And how do we go on this journey? Well, we need to get on board. We need to start moving. We need to start going. We need to start taking a step, moving in the general direction. And as we go, we are adjusting how we see, where we are pointing at, where the boat is going, how is it moving, which direction it's facing, how do we go forward in that. So you see, what is happening here, it's not that we have to have 100% clearly defined goalpost. It's about the starting point. We know where the general direction is. We point our boat in a certain direction that compensates for the undercurrents, the weather, the other factors that surround us, the size of the boat, the strength, the resources, the fuel. We understand the entire conditions of how we set off. And that's when we begin to move. And as we move, we can compensate for the different shifts in the directions. And that's how we move and navigate ourselves through the entirety of that journey. And that kind of brings that parallel, such a powerful parallel to the coaching mindset, which is about that openness, to stay that openness. Because too often, when we are stuck or when we're so focused on that outcome, we neglect the people, we neglect the person. Or when we're so stuck on that this is the only direction there, we've totally eliminate the other possible directions. You see, for us to get to point A to point B, most of us think of a straight line. But what if getting from point A to point B is not about the straight line? What if it's about curving the line? Ever taken a plane before? Well, most planes don't go on a straight line to their destination. So on the map, it looks like if I draw a straight line, we will get there. No. Planes also consider the curvature of the Earth. They also consider the wind speeds, the currents, the weather, the plane size, the traffic, many different conditions, and the rotation of the Earth. So sometimes you hear planes from the North Atlantic going on the jet stream to compensate, to allow the jet stream to lift them, move them faster. Sometimes going from east to west or west to east because of the Earth rotation. The calculation of the plane direction and distance will also be adjusted. So you notice that if our modern vehicles do not travel in a straight line, what does this say about our goalpost and the direction we're moving? You see, too often organizations and leaders, they think about solving a huge issue or big issue as a straight line. They want to get that clarity, they want to get that certainty. They want to know exactly how to do this. The 3 points, the 3 objectives. But I tell leaders, I say, hey, we got to let go of the need to have that perfect measure, the need to have that perfect ideal outcome or the ideal solution. We just need a sense of general direction. Where do you want to go? Where's the general direction we want to go? And redefine it as we move along the way. Because what is true today, as we move in the next several months, because of market conditions, because of things that happen globally, climate issues, weather issues, humanity issues, health issues, it could be many different things that could happen. But if we kind of get so fixated on a particular point or a particular way of doing things, we have forced ourselves shut and as such have remained closed and not open. And that's why I say that the coaching mindset is so critical to remain open and not just closed. And that is something very, very crucial for all coaches and leaders to kind of understand and dive deeper. You see, the coaching process, it's not one where we do unto others. It's one where we create or we co-create the conditions of learning, enabling that curiosity. You see, when I'm curious, when I'm open, the client can be curious and open. The client can also be flexible. And what is flexibility? Flexibility means this. It doesn't mean that the models that I like or that I enjoy is the only model that can help the client. Too often I've seen coaches that go online, social media, they talk to their friends, they boast about how, it's all about self-advertisements, about how wonderful, how flexible they are, about how many certifications they have, or boast about how the models or the strategies or their approach is the best, or the world best. And because of doing so, they become less flexible and they become fixated on a certain way because we're so entrenched to think that that model, it's the only model to help the client. But the reality is this. Around the world, we all have different needs. We all have different approaches. We all have different learning styles. So we may try to categorize things to simplify things. But sometimes simplifying things, you begin to experience this reductionist approach where you eliminate a lot of critical information. There's a point where you can't simplify any further. Any further simplification, you remove or you eliminate resolution. Just like a picture. The more I remove the pixels of the picture, the less resolution I get. So I may get a sense of what the picture is, but I'm losing resolution. I'm losing precision. I'm losing sharpness. I'm losing details. And that's the problem with a lot of approaches that many coaches take, which is they are fixated on a point, fixated on the two. You see, we're not two fixers. We're not two oriented coaches. We are person oriented, client centered, client oriented, which means that the mindset that we should take is one that revolves around the client, how they see the world, how they best learn, how they best understand things, how they best communicate, how they best understand, how they best develop themselves. And I want to adapt my style to them. So which means that every client I take on, I'm also learning. I'm also learning about their ways. I get them to teach me about how they see the world, how they learn about the world, because I want to be as effective as a leader, as a coach for them, because I want to create the conditions for them to succeed, for them to get to where they want to be. And my definition of success is not important. I want to hear what the client's definition of success for themselves really is. And as such, this idea of this mindset that we enter the conversation is so critical. It's not about who we are, what we do, it's about the client. And that is the key. That is the critical piece of the entire coaching process. And that's something that I want all of us to also understand and dive deeper within ourselves. So that's competency number two. And when we mentioned this, I talked previously about having these three key elements to developing this mindset fundamentals, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-development. And we talked about self-awareness previously as well as being aware of our roles as coaches and how we partner with our clients to facilitate growth and new awareness for them, to be more playful, explore nuances so we can adapt our coaching style to enable client autonomy. Notice it's about enabling that autonomy, about enabling the client for who they are. It's not about telling the client that how they should live, how they should be, or who they should become. We want them to be who they are. Be true to themselves. Be who they are as an individual, as a person. And this idea and this sense of playfulness in that coaching conversational process is so critical because it's not about trying to force feed something. It's about bringing that playful nuance within that context so that the client is creative, it's agile, it's experiencing the needs that they really want. And that playful exploration, I think it's so critical. I have a whole series on playful exploration where I teach coaches at the mastery level as well of how to apply that in their conversation context. And also notice this, the process of self-awareness is also about being aware of how our own worldview, our own backgrounds, our own value systems, beliefs, ideology, philosophy, approaches may influence who we are as individuals and how we show up in the conversation. So allowing our self-awareness to be more aware or to grow allows us to tap into our intuition to support the client in the entirety of the coaching process. Because when we can recognize what is really speaking, is it our intuition or is it our ego? Is it our awareness? Is it just us trying to show off? And then that's where we can offer that insight or intuition in that coaching conversation process to support the client truly. And that's something important for that self-awareness piece. The next element, it's self-development. Now, what's self-development? Self-development is the ability to identify opportunities to develop as a coach, as a person, as a leader. And I say this to everyone. I said, it doesn't matter whether you have a title for leader or not, because leadership, it's not a title. Leadership, it's who you are. Do you want to choose to be a leader? As a self-leader, who is the first person I'm leading? I'm leading myself. How I show up, how I enhance my state, how I stabilize my state, how I regulate my state for the day, how I approach my daily conversations, how I see my attitudes towards my work, my career, my relationships. So being aware of that first, it's important. Because when we are aware of our own learning styles, we are able then to develop continuous learning. So this is where I invite coaches who are beginning their coaching journey or developing about learning coaching, understanding their own personal learning styles. We all have different learning styles. We can have categories of learning styles. And there are different theories out there that defines different styles of learning. Sometimes they use a very simple VAK model of visual, auditory, kinesthetic to say, okay, you're more visual learner, you're more auditory learner. The problem with all these different models out there, frameworks, categories out there, on one hand, I can understand why coaches, leaders, HR professionals, and people like to use these models because it simplifies things. Remember what I said earlier, by simplification or by categorization, it may make you sound profound, but it reduces resolution. And because of that, we get so stuck that I'm a V, I'm a A, I'm a K, or I'm a high E or high D, high I, high S. When we do that, we attach ourselves to words. And that's the problem because we are not the words. We are individual human beings, complex, profound, and we have different layers of us. And I call this the different circles of us. And because of that multitude of who we are, there is no one category that we can truly say, okay, I'm only a visual person. In fact, the research have shown that this idea of separating people into VAKOG, it's not entirely accurate as well because we have elements of each one of them for every situation. For example, if I'm learning math today, like mathematics, studying something that has logical implications and stuff, or computer science or learning coding, some researchers will indicate that, oh, you need a high V, you need a high visualization to be able to understand the entirety of the concept. And we begin to see that, oh, we attribute certain things to certain things. And as such, we have placed limits. Do you notice that? All these different styles and tools and assessments only serve to place limits on individuals. But who says that I as a highly emotive or highly empathic person cannot be great at mathematics? So that's the problem. When we categorize things or we put things in boxes, that could happen. So what I want to invite you to do is first spend some time and see how you tend to learn. And I do this exercise for all coaches, all leaders, all the time. Go to a bookstore and look at different books from different categories, different sections. And I want you to notice where your eyes, your body, your your feelings, your heart, your emotions tend to get drawn to. Is it more on fictional books, more non-fiction books? Is it more on thicker books, printed books, more images? Is it on mangas, animes, comics, more on pottery, botany, food, literature, poetry, philosophy, science, self help, management? Look at where your body gets drawn to naturally, right? So don't second guess yourself, go towards that direction. And then look at the whole array of those books in that section. And all I want you to do is just observe which one has drawn your eyes to. Because the one that's drawing your eyes or drawing yourself to will indicate something that you are preferring about that particular title, that style of writing, that style of illustration, or the content. So from there, you can begin to learn a little bit more about yourself. Now, if you go to the bookstore and say, okay, nothing attracts me, I'm a more of a listener person, then go to online, go to a audiobook store, go to a list of podcasts, like the podcast that I have, right? You go to a list of podcasts, there's many educational podcasts, many fictional podcasts, or go to Audible with a lot of different audiobooks as well, and see which one draws you. And experience that for yourself. Now, if you say, oh, those also don't engage me, I don't like that. I like to talk to someone in person. I like to attend workshops. I like to attend engagement sessions. I like to be there with people, interacting with that. Okay, go and attend, right? Experience that. I want you to gain that awareness of yourself, of what learning styles best match you. Because as a coach, the more we know about ourselves, the more we can help support our clients. The less we know about ourselves, the less we're able to support our clients. So that's important for us to understand the conditions of learning. And that's why self development is so critical in the coaching process. It's not about self development for the client, but first, it's for the coach. And I think that that is such an important element in the coaching process. First, self development for self. And then create dedicated time to reflect on how your sessions, your coaching sessions have went for yourself, for the client. And also spend time engaging a mentor coach. I do a lot of mentor coaching for many, many coaches around the world. And I spend time helping them to reflect how the coaching sessions went and honoring the coaching ethics by directing clients to their professional service when needed. So, for example, sometimes clients may need more than coaching. They may need additional mental health help, additional professional support from psychology, psychiatry, or doctors, or mentors, or other support functions. As such, it's important for us to also understand what is the boundary of coaching, what can we truly offer, because we're not a person who can do all things. We need to know what we are best at doing, what we can do ethically, and beyond that boundary, inviting the client to take on other support systems. In the very same way as ourselves, what are our support systems? Do we have our own coach or coach supervisor to support us in our development? And that's where I invite coaches from all organizations. Sometimes I'm invited as a coach supervisor, as a coach mentor, to support the learning and development of those leaders in those organizations as well. And that to me is such a critical process. Next, I think the third element that's really, really important is self-regulation. Are we able to regulate ourselves emotionally, mentally, physically, psychologically, sometimes even spiritually as well, about how we show up in that space of coaching? Because sometimes we get so enthusiastic. I've seen coaches, they're very, very, very sincere, very enthusiastic about helping the client. And because they're so fixated on helping the client, their help becomes a burden to the client because the client feels pressured to be helped. Sometimes all the client needs is a hearing ear. Sometimes all a client needs is just someone to be there to hear them. So this idea and notion of us needing to help the client sometimes can be a stumbling stone for the client. And that's where I say self-regulation is a very critical piece in the coaching conversation process, where we ask ourselves, are we aware of how these emotions are showing up? How are we managing our own emotions? How do we tend to be? Are there any stories from the clients or anything the client is saying that is affecting us emotionally or emotional state? How about our mental state? Because self-regulation ain't just about emotions. It's about our mental state, our physiological state. Because sometimes as a coach, you may have bodily hiccups. Maybe, for example, you had a heavy meal just before the coaching session and you are struggling to stay awake, or your stomach is growling. And so we need to be able to regulate well to show up in that space with accuracy, dignity, and honor and respect for the client. And that to me, it's so critical in that coaching conversation space. So self-regulation, very, very important. So prepare well for the sessions mentally and emotionally. Be aware of the rhythm that works for us to be in that state, that mental state, so that we can support the client fully and not forcefully. You see, too often many coaches, we want to be there for the client, but we are so forceful. We may have forceful empathy. We may have forceful enthusiasm. We have not come to the level of the client. We need to meet the client at where they are, not at where we are. So if I notice the client, it's a little bit down, I don't want to come into the session being so uplifted, so happy. It might make the client feel even more down. So I need to be sensitive to the client as well. So this ability to self-regulate myself, prepare myself mentally, emotionally for the session, get myself the rhythm. Now, how do we do this? I would say engage a coach. You need to work with a coach over a period of time to discover what are some areas that you're not aware of, that you need more regulation in, so you can control yourself when you enter that conversation space. I now often say this. Self-regulation is like the rhythm. Do we know the rhythm of our heartbeat? How do we tend to be in that moment? How do we tend to go? How do we tend to show? How do we tend to, come across in the conversation space? So it's really important when we go into the conversation context that we know what is working for us and what it works for us to be in that state, that mental state of calmness and stillness. And I often call this self-regulation is about coming to the place of stillness. You can think of it as stoicism, but it's not really stoicism. It's more about being able to adjust and regulate your psychological, cognitive, emotional, physiological state and being to support the client in the best possible manner. And that's why I say in the coaching mindset, these three fundamentals, self-awareness, self-development, self-regulation, are so critical pieces that truly supports the client in the coaching process. It's not about us showing off about how much we know, it's about us showing up and setting the right conditions for success, the right conditions to allow the client to shine for who they are. Inspire them to change, inspire them to make a difference, inspire them to tap into their potentiality, because every single client have a potential within, a potential for change, a potential to succeed, a potential for greatness. You see, going for good to great isn't about achieving something. It's more than that. It's about that mindset, it's about that space to allow an individual human being to discover who they are in that process, and in that process of discovering who they are, to come to acceptance and decision and say, hey, you know what, let's take that step. Very much like the boat. Once the boat has kind of set course of where they want to go, they cannot just be fixated, because sometimes along the way there may be potential threats, potential obstacles, and the navigator must know how to navigate based on the different conditions at the time and make adjustments. So sometimes it seems that our direction, that where we're heading, seems to get further and further and further and further, but we have to tell ourselves, hey, we ain't getting further. What if we're not getting further? What if, we are moving in the right direction? What if we're moving in the direction where it's really supporting us, getting us to where we want to be? What if the entirety of the process isn't about us, but it's about being client-centered? So I want you to think about this. What does it mean for you to embody a coaching mindset with these three keywords? Embodiment, what does it mean? Coaching, what does it mean? And a mindset. And when we integrate these three things together, how do we develop this further and sustain this? How do we continuously build that by embodying that mindset? And you notice this is not something that we a checklist of things to do, but it's about that embodiment, that acceptance, that ability to say, hey, this is the mindset, this is who I am, being that self-aware. This is what I need to do to develop myself, self-development, and this is how I tend to show up and regulate myself. So if I notice myself and I notice that, hey, sometimes I tend to be like this or like that, and under different conditions, I may behave differently, I need to be able to know how to set the right conditions, the right environmental conditions, whether online, in-person interactions with the client, that will best support the client to the best of my ability in the coaching process. Remember, coaching, it's not about trying to show off, it's about showing up, and coaching, it's conversational mastery. Thank you for tuning in to The Coach Within. If today's episode sparked something in you, take a moment to reflect, journal, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. Want to experience coaching or explore our upcoming programs? Head to jedi.coach or check out our show notes to connect. If this podcast helped you to grow, please follow, share, and leave a review. It helps more people to find us. And until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep braving your story from within.